Okay, so like, have you ever just stopped and thought about how someone just a few years back could have told us that AI would be writing hit songs? Wild, right?
Totally. Or that we'd all be carrying around these, like, supercomputers
Uh,
in our pockets.
it's like we're living in the future, which is already kind of a cliche, but still. And it just keeps changing faster and faster.
It's true. This world feels like it's straight out of science fiction sometimes. And honestly, I think that's exactly why this whole deep dive on cultivating imagination is so relevant now.
Right, because with all this crazy technology, all these tools, the thing that makes us, what makes us irreplaceable, uniquely human, it's our imagination.
Absolutely. Our ability to imagine. And that brings us to this book chapter we're diving into. It really grabbed my attention because it lays out this framework. It's almost like a workout. But for your imagination, they call it the imagination telescope.
Ooh, I like that. It's like we're not just passively observing, we can actively strengthen our ability to imagine.
Exactly.
And the cool part is it's not like some rigid formula. It's about figuring out what works for you.
Yes. The imagination telescope offers these different lenses, or like ways of thinking, ways of being that help you focus and refine how you imagine.
So kind of like swapping lenses on a camera, depending on what you're trying to capture.
Yes,
Got
exactly.
that visual.
And the first lens we're going to look at is all about mindset. Because what's interesting is it's not just what you think about, but how you think that really shapes your imagination.
Okay, so let's dive into that. The chapter talks about these specific mindsets that are like rocket fuel for your imagination. And the first one they highlight is the growth mindset. I mean, we've all heard of it, but I'm curious to see how they connect it to imagination.
Well, they emphasize that instead of saying like, ugh, I'm not good at this, a growth mindset asks, okay, but how can I get better? It's about being excited by possibilities,
Hmm.
you know, even when it comes to new technologies that might feel intimidating at first.
Which I think ties in perfectly with the next mindset they mentioned, gratitude, right?
Yeah.
If you're constantly focused on what you don't have or what you can't do, it's got to be tough to see those opportunities right in front of you.
And they actually bring up Oprah Winfrey as an example. Apparently, she's a huge believer in the power of gratitude to shift your perspective, to open your mind up to new possibilities.
That actually reminds me of something I heard Oprah say once.
Oh, let's hear it.
She was talking about how, even on her toughest days, she takes a moment to write down 5 things she's grateful for. And it's not always big things. Sometimes it's as simple as a hot cup of coffee or a phone call with a friend. Just little things.
That's such a simple but powerful practice. And I think it speaks to that shift from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset.
Oh, right. The abundance mindset. That's the next one they talk about, right? Tell me more about how that ties into imagination.
Well, it's like this. Imagine there's not just one pie that everyone's fighting over, but a whole buffet of delicious possibilities. That's the essence of the abundance mindset, believing that there's enough for everyone, and that your success doesn't have to come at the expense of someone else's.
So instead of thinking there's only one right way to do this, or there are limited opportunities in my field, it's about seeing all the different paths and possibilities that are out there.
Exactly. And I think this is especially important today because things are changing so rapidly.
Hmm.
New industries are emerging, old ones are being disrupted. There's a sense of incredible opportunity if you can tap into that abundance mindset.
Yeah, it's like rewiring your brain to see possibility instead of limits. I love it. Okay, so we've talked about growth mindset, gratitude, and abundance. What's the last mindset in this imagination boosting cocktail?
The final one they highlight is the longevity mindset.
Uh,
And this one really made me stop and think.
Right. It's not just about living longer, is it? There's got to be more to it than that.
Exactly. It's about having the mental capacity, the resilience, and you guessed it, the imagination, to not just exist, but to thrive throughout those years.
That makes a lot of sense, because if we're living longer lives, we'll need to constantly adapt, learn new things, reinvent ourselves. And you can't do that without a healthy dose of imagination. Okay, so those are the 4 mindsets. But how do we actually put them into practice? It's one thing to understand them, but how do we integrate them into our daily lives?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And I think that's where the imagination telescope analogy is so helpful because it suggests that we can actively choose which lens we're looking through. It's like every morning you wake up and you get to ask yourself, okay, which mindset is going to serve me best today? Or, if you're facing some kind of challenge, you can ask, which lens can help me see this differently?
Oh, I like that. So it's not about being locked into one mindset all the time.
Right?
It's about having all these different tools and knowing when to use them.
Exactly. And this brings us to the second lens of the imagination telescope. Remember we were talking about Oprah's gratitude practice?
Yeah, how could I forget? 5 things you're grateful for every day, no matter what.
Well, that ties in beautifully with this next lens, which they call the information biome.
Yeah.
And they use this really interesting analogy to explain it.
Hit me with it. I'm intrigued.
They compare it to the gut microbiome.
Hmm.
Like that whole idea that all the bacteria in our gut, like trillions of them or something, they play a huge role in our health.
Right, right. So are they saying that what we consume, but mentally, is just as important as what we eat?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They argue that just like we need to feed our bodies healthy food, we need to feed our minds the right kind of information.
That makes so much sense. There's just so much information out there these days, it can feel like we're drowning in it.
It really can.
And let's be honest, we've all fallen into that trap of scrolling endlessly through social media or like binge watching the news, even when it just leaves us feeling, I don't know, drained and anxious.
Totally. It's like junk food, but for your brain.
Yeah.
And the chapter really emphasizes that point. It's not just about consuming more information, but about being selective.
Hmm.
It's about asking yourself, what am I drawn to? What actually expands my thinking? What sparks my curiosity?
It's like curating your own mind, right?
Yeah.
Choosing which ideas and perspectives you're going to let in. So what are some of the things they suggest feeding our information bio?
Well, they talk about diversifying our sources of information. So books and articles are great, of course, but they also encourage exploring art, music, even getting out into nature, things that stimulate your senses and create those new neural connections.
So it's not just about what we read or watch. It's about having all these different experiences that challenge and inspire us. And I guess that's different for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
Like some people might be super into classical music, while others find inspiration in street art or stand-up comedy. It's about finding what lights your fire.
Exactly. And I love how they phrase it. They say it's about cultivating a taste for the unexpected.
Ooh, I like that. Okay, so we're thinking about what we're feeding our minds, how we're expanding our perspective. Is there anything they say to, I don't know, specifically avoid? Are there mental junk foods we should be cutting back on?
Absolutely. They actually dedicate a whole section to this, talking about being mindful of what we exclude from our information diet.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So what are some of the things they put on the do not consume list?
Well, doom scrolling is a big one. They argue that constantly bombarding ourselves with like negative news and social media drama,
Hmm.
it can actually make it harder to imagine positively.
It's like that saying, garbage in, garbage out, right? If we're constantly filling our minds with negativity, it's going to be hard to generate those positive, imaginative thoughts.
Exactly. And it's not about, ignoring the problems in the world. It's about finding a healthy balance. They even suggest like setting time limits for social media and news, or just being more intentional about who you follow online. Try to find accounts that inspire and uplift you rather than ones that leave you feeling drained and depleted.
That's such good advice. It's so easy to get sucked into that vortex of negativity online, but being more mindful of what we consume is so important for cultivating that healthy information biome.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of things that are essential for a healthy mind and body,
You're going to say rest, aren't you?
you know it.
Yeah.
And this is where we get to the third lens of the imagination telescope, the diversified rest portfolio.
Okay, before you go on, I have to admit, rest is something I really struggle with.
I think we all do.
It's true. In today's world, it often feels like such a luxury, like something I can't afford, you know?
I hear you. But that's exactly why I found this chapter so insightful, because they argue that rest isn't just about recharging our batteries. It's essential for processing information and for sparking creativity.
Really? Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more about this diversified rest portfolio. What exactly is it?
Well, it starts with recognizing that there are different types of rest, different flavors of rest, and what works for one person might not work for another. It's about having a variety of tools in your toolkit and knowing which ones work best for you in different situations.
Okay, so again, it goes back to personalization, right? It's
Exactly.
not a one-size-fits-all approach to rest.
Exactly. For some people, it might be going for a run, hitting the gym. For others, it might be curling up with a good book or spending time in nature. And for others, it might be connecting with loved ones or pursuing a creative hobby.
So it's about figuring out what activities help you disconnect, recharge, and come back feeling refreshed and energized.
Precisely.
What other flavors of rest do they mention?
Well, they talk about sleep, of course. But they also delve into the concept of micro rests, those like short breaks you take throughout the day, just a few minutes here and there, that can make a big difference in your energy levels and your focus.
Oh, like taking 5 minutes to step away from your computer and do some deep breathing exercises, or
Exact.
listening to a calming song.
Yes. Even just standing up and stretching or taking a quick walk around the block can help reset your mind and body.
They even talk about things like taking a nap or indulging in a bit of dark chocolate as part
Yeah.
of a diversified rest portfolio.
Oh, they do. And I think that's what makes this framework so refreshing. It's not about deprivation. It's not about pushing ourselves to the limit. It's about finding sustainable practices that nourish our minds and bodies.
It's not just about how much rest we're getting, but also the quality and variety of rest we're incorporating into our lives.
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of a portfolio comes in, right?
Yeah.
Just like you wouldn't invest all your money in one stock, you don't want to rely on just one type of rest.
So instead of thinking, I just need to sleep more, it's about asking yourself, what kind of rest would best serve me right now?
Exactly. And that's going to look different depending on the day, the week, even the season of life you're in.
Okay, so we've established that rest is not for the weak. It is a crucial component of the imagination telescope. I'm curious, what's the final lens all about?
Ah, this one is particularly intriguing. They call it convergent sense making. And it's all about connecting the dots.
Connecting the dots. Okay, I'm all ears.
Essentially, it's about taking all the information we've gathered, all the different perspectives we've been exposed to, and then weaving them together into something meaningful. It's about creating our own unique understanding of the world.
So if the previous lens was about like expanding what we take in, making sure we have all these different sources of info and experience to draw from,
Right.
then this lens is about what we do with all that input. It's about actually making sense of it all
Right.
and turning it into something new.
You got it. And they actually make this interesting point. They argue that sense making is a form of storytelling, essentially.
Oh, I like that. Tell me more about that connection.
So they're saying that when we make sense of the world, we're creating a narrative. We're creating a story,
Right.
basically, that helps us understand our place in it all. And each of us, every single one of us, has our own unique story to tell.
That is such a powerful idea. It means even though we might be getting hit with like all the same info as everyone else, we're all going to process it differently.
Yeah.
We connect different dots and we end up with our own unique interpretation.
Precisely. And that's where the convergence part comes in. It's about recognizing that our understanding of the world is always evolving as we encountered like new information and experiences.
So it's not about like figuring out some fixed truth. It's about being open to being wrong, maybe, and being willing to change our minds and our narratives as we learn and grow.
Exactly. And that brings us to the end of the four lenses of the imagination telescope. It's a lot, but I think it's important to remember.
This whole thing, the imagination telescope, it's really a journey, isn't it?
It is.
It's like, it's not just about becoming more imaginative, full stop, but it's about understanding how our minds work and what we can each do to really like unlock our potential, our creative potential.
That's a great way to put it. And, I was just thinking, this whole framework is incredibly empowering,
Yeah.
especially in a world where it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by information, by technology, by everything, really.
Totally. Instead of feeling like we're falling behind, it gives us these tools to navigate this crazy world
Yeah,
and to actually shape it with our own imaginations.
absolutely. We're not just along for the ride. We're active participants in creating the future. And I think that's really cool.
That is a really cool thought. But okay, full honesty, after this deep dive, after these four lenses, mindset, information biome, diversified rest portfolio, convergent sense making, I'm a little overwhelmed. Where do I even begin?
I hear you. It's a lot to take in. But remember what we said earlier. Rest is our friend.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best thing you can do is just, let all this marinate. Let those connections emerge organically.
Okay, yeah, that's reassuring. So it's not about like mastering all four of these lenses overnight. It's about just incorporating these practices into our lives, little by little.
Yes, exactly.
Like building any habit takes time, takes effort. But in this case, what's the payoff?
A stronger, more flexible imagination.
Ooh, I like that flexible imagination. That's really what it's all about, right? Being able to look at the world from all these different angles and come up with solutions that are actually like creative, not just the same old, same old.
Exactly. And to see possibilities you might have missed otherwise. Speaking of which, did they mention that card game? I think it was called Sapien 2.0.
They did. It's designed to get those conversations going, about the future.
Yeah.
Like really interesting, thought-provoking questions about how tech might change our lives. Everything from like work to relationships to the meaning of life, all that good stuff.
That's so cool. We should check it out.
Totally. Maybe even play it with some friends. Flex those imagination muscles. And speaking of flexing those muscles, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Any final thoughts?
I think that quote you mentioned earlier is perfect. Imagination is a skill that needs to be nurtured, just like any other. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Ooh, yes, it is a good one. Because it reminds us that we're not stuck. We're not stuck with whatever imagination we were born with. We can actually get better.
We can. We can cultivate it, strengthen it, and we can use it to create incredible things.
Absolutely. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, but what does that even look like in my life? Here's a question for you. What's one small step, just one, that you can take today, right now, to give your imagination a little workout?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one to sit with.
Right. Make it real. Well, on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the imagination telescope. We hope you've come away with some new insights, new tools, and maybe even a renewed sense of wonder.
Yes. And remember, your imagination is powerful, so don't be afraid to use it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep those imaginations fired up.